He confessed to over 30 murders. He treated his victims like objects and showed absolutely zero remorse. This was a man who savagely snuffed out the lives of some of America's brightest and most beautiful young women. And yet, instead of universal revulsion, he received adoration. Today, we're diving into this unsettling paradox. We're going to explore the dark corners of human psychology to explain a phenomenon that really, truly should be impossible. Let's look at the psychology of attraction and why women fell in love with Ted Bundy.
The contrast here is undeniable, and it's deeply disturbing. On one hand, you have the objective, horrific reality of a predator, a man who literally kept a space on the floor of his tan Volkswagen Beetle specifically for the bodies of his victims. But then, on the other hand, you have the baffling public reaction. Hundreds of love letters pouring into his prison cell, actual marriage proposals, women dressing up just to sit in the front rows of his trial. I mean, one woman even left her husband for him.
So, the absolutely crucial question we have to ask is why? Why did people love him anyway? Finding that answer means we have to step away from the bloody crimes themselves and step into a dark investigation of attraction, manipulation, and honestly, the vulnerabilities hidden inside all of us.
You know, before the term serial killer was even a thing in the public consciousness, Theodore Robert Bundy presented an impeccable mask of sanity. He grew up in a totally normal family, studied psychology, and frankly, he just didn't look like a monster. And he didn't hide in the shadows to snatch his victims either. He weaponized his charm in broad daylight. Think about Lake Sammamish, packed with 40,000 people on a hot Sunday. He'd show up, present this totally safe persona, often wearing a fake plaster cast on his arm. Then he'd feign vulnerability, asking young women if they could help him carry a canoe to his car. That perceived helplessness, it completely bypassed their societal alarms. He used his charm as a weapon, and tragically, it worked.
And if you're wondering just how flawless that mask was, consider Anne Rule. She's one of America's most respected true crime writers. And she actually worked right alongside Bundy at a suicide crisis hotline. They worked the late shift together, literally saving lives. He would even walk her to her car at 2 in the morning to make sure she was safe. Her verdict at the time? She thought he was genuinely kind, empathetic, and funny. Even the seasoned professionals were entirely fooled.
When Bundy went on trial in 1979, it was one of the first murder trials ever to be televised live in the United States, and it became an absolute circus. Women packed the front rows, utterly fascinated by this confident former law student who had the arrogant audacity to defend himself on national television. And then came the most staggering moment of all. He called his former coworker, Carol Ann Bone, to the witness stand, and while questioning her under oath, Bundy proposed. She said yes. Utilizing an obscure Florida legal loophole, Ted Bundy formally married a woman right in the middle of his own murder trial. They even conceived a child while he was sitting on death row.
Now, it's incredibly easy to look at those courtroom groupies and just dismiss them as crazy. But that's the easy answer. And as investigators, we know the easy answer is almost always wrong. These women were victims of very specific, highly powerful psychological forces. First, there's Hybristophilia, which is sometimes called Bonnie and Clyde syndrome. This is a clinically documented sexual attraction to people who have committed serious, violent crimes. But I want to be perfectly clear here. Hybristophilia alone does not explain the sheer scale of the Bundy phenomenon. Normal, educated women across the entire country were falling for his TV persona, and unpacking that requires a much deeper look at human cognitive bias.
There were actually 4 distinct psychological forces working together to hack the public's perception of this killer. We're looking at the halo effect, the forbidden fruit effect, the savior complex, and his extreme displays of confidence and dominance. These 4 cognitive loopholes essentially overrode human logic, turning a terrifying predator into an object of national infatuation. Let's examine that first force, the halo effect. This is a brutal, evolutionary bias hardwired into the human brain. We automatically assume that physically attractive people are also inherently good, smart, and trustworthy. Because Bundy was objectively good-looking, when women looked at him, their brains automatically received deep subconscious signals of safety and kindness. That biological signal was so incredibly loud, it completely drowned out the factual, horrific evidence of his guilt that was being presented right there in court.
Then we have the forbidden fruit effect. Danger is naturally exciting to the human brain. We literally get a massive hit of dopamine when we engage with threatening or taboo subjects. But the key factor here is distance. Bundy was undeniably a dangerous predator, but for the millions of women watching at home, he was safely behind the TV glass. He was locked in handcuffs. It was the absolute perfect psychological cocktail. He was close enough to provide the thrill of the danger, but far enough away that they felt perfectly safe.
Force number 3 is deeply rooted in how many people are socialized, the savior complex. We're talking about that strong I-can-fix-him impulse. Many of his admirers genuinely believed he was just misunderstood or even innocent, and that with the right kind of love, he could be redeemed. Bundy was highly articulate and just a masterful manipulator. He actively encouraged this belief, making these women feel like they were the only ones who truly understood the sensitive, broken soul trapped beneath all those terrible accusations. Finally, force number 4. Extreme displays of confidence read to our brains as primate dominance. When Bundy represented himself in court, doing it calmly, arrogantly, and completely fearlessly, he projected immense power. But it wasn't just in the courtroom either. I mean, he famously escaped custody twice. He jumped from a second-story library window in Aspen and later crawled through a ceiling vent in Glenwood Springs, evading massive, heavily armed manhunts. While everyone else was terrified of the situation, he seemed entirely in control. And to a watching human brain, that kind of raw defiance and dominance is magnetically attractive.
His professors, his colleagues, his long-term girlfriend Liz, who dated him for years, absolutely none of them realized what he was doing in the dark. The monster who bludgeoned young women to death and the charming law student who smiled warmly for the cameras were the exact same person. And honestly, that is the core terror of this case. The system we humans rely on to identify danger, our intuition, our gut feelings, it completely and utterly failed. Our evolutionary hardware is simply not wired to detect a predator who wears a flawless mask. The women who were attracted to him were not crazy or broken. Their hardware was hacked. Which brings us to a really urgent question. You might be watching this thinking, well, this is a 1970s story. We have the internet now. We know better. Are things different today? The incredibly unsettling answer is no. Our hardware hasn't evolved a bit in 40 years. We are just as vulnerable today as those women were in that Florida courtroom.
Consider this. When Ted Bundy was executed in 1989, crowds gathered outside the prison and cheered. But fast forward to 2019, when Netflix released a documentary series about him, social media absolutely exploded. And not with horror, but with mass thirst. Thousands of young women tweeted about how attractive he was, literally forcing Netflix to issue an official statement begging people to stop. And when director Joe Berlinger cast Zac Efron to play him in a movie, that was highly controversial, but it was entirely intentional. He wanted to make modern audiences feel exactly what Bundy's victims felt. Charmed first, horrified second. Understanding all of this isn't just some exercise in morbid true crime curiosity. This is vital psychological self-defense. The exact same forces that made people fall for a serial killer are the forces that keep people trapped in abusive relationships today. They're the same forces that make charismatic, highly dangerous leaders seem completely trustworthy. So we're leaving you with 3 empowering rules from modern life. First, trust behavior, not presentation. Charming presentations are often a very calculated predatory strategy. Second, that I can fix them feeling is a massive red flag. Healthy attraction absolutely does not require you to rescue someone from their darkness. And third, you must accept that your instincts can be hacked.
We have to remember that our social instincts were built for small, tight-knit tribes, not for mass media, carefully crafted public personas, or sociopaths wearing perfect masks of sanity. Being fooled by a skilled manipulator is a hardware limitation, not a sign of stupidity.
Knowing your own mind has these built-in vulnerabilities is really the first step to true protection. But all of this leaves us with one final, haunting thought. If the ultimate predator looks exactly like the perfect gentleman, who are you smiling at today?